Hello. How is everyone today on this beautiful, beautiful rainy Wednesday? I'm Coach Kylene. It is so nice to see all of you today. I'm excited to start the series of classes that I talked about a couple weeks ago. If you didn't see that video, go back and rewatch it. It's pinned at the top of this page, but it's basically just sort of letting you know what is going to be involved in this page and the classes that I'll be teaching around betrayal, around addiction, around recovery, all those amazing things. And I would just love to hear from you. So when I go live like this, drop your questions in the comments below. Let me know what questions you have about anything I'm talking about. If maybe I say a sentence in here and you're like, ooh, I'd really like to learn more about that, drop it below so that I can make a different video about that. I want to personalize these classes to you and where you are at. So that actually sort of starts us with what we're talking about today, which is the 5 phases of recovery. And so if, in order to kind of know what you need, it's helpful to know where you are. But also as somebody who went through betrayal, I really wanted somebody to give me a roadmap. Like what does this look like? And what can I expect? And what do I need to do? And so while everyone's journey is going to be very different, there are some stages and some phases of recovery that are consistent. And this is what it looks like. And so I'm going to do my best today to kind of walk you through what that looks like so that you can identify more easily what stage of recovery you are in. There's no right or wrong here. I'm just going to kind of walk you through the stages themselves, what you might be experiencing in that stage, some questions to reflect on if you're kind of moving out of that stage. And then at the end, once you've sort of figured out what stage you're in, some questions to prompt you towards further healing. So I promised that I would give you some actual steps that you could take to work towards recovery while we're talking about the actual phases themselves. And so that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be talking about that, where you are, what that looks like, and then of course, like what are some things that you need to do inside of that phase in order to move to the next one. And then at the end, wherever you're at, some questions that you can maybe sit with, ponder, journal to help you move forward once you discover where you're at. Okay, so that being said, we're going to jump right in. I always want to start by saying too, I always encourage everyone, no matter what phase you're in, if you haven't already worked with somebody, a counselor, a therapist, a coach, a betrayal trauma coach like myself, someone that is familiar with trauma, someone that is familiar with addiction, someone that is familiar with betrayal and sex addiction, that sort of thing, I highly encourage you to work with someone one-on-one. It is, or it can be when it's a good professional, absolutely life transformational. And then if you're also not in a group support of other betrayed partners that can relate to you, I would encourage you to look in your local area, look at your churches in the local area, those sorts of things. If you do have a therapist or a counselor or a coach that you're working with, if they have groups, finding that community can be so helpful because you are not alone. Your experience is unique, but others are experiencing similar things. And so it really helps to be seen and heard and validated. And I hope to provide some of that to you today, as well as some education and just actual, actionable items that you can utilize to continue moving forward. So let's get started. So what are the 5 phases of recovery? And I will post some visuals over the next, couple weeks or so in the group around this. And so you'll have some things that maybe you can save to your phone and look back at, or you can watch this video again, but I'll post some things that might be a little bit helpful after this as well. So the 5 phases of recovery are shock, assessment, or you might call this assessment or stability. Those kind of go hand in hand. Active healing is stage 3, creation, and U 2.0. Now, if you Google these, you're not going to see these same names. I've made up the names, but these are essentially the 5 phases that you are going through. So let's start with the first one. So the first phase is what all of us have discovered, and some of you may still be in, and that is shock. And so let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. So for me, shock actually lasted about 4 months. So what's interesting about shock is because many of you may actually go, I'm not in shock, I passed that right away. Some of you may know that you're in shock. I actually didn't really know that I was in shock because it lasted so long for me. when I looked back on it, like I probably would have said the first couple days I was in shock, but I didn't really recognize that it lasted so long for me until I was out of it. And then I went, oh, I think that was like a 4 month phase of shock for me. It took me a really, really long time to process that my life was going to be different and that this was true and that this actually happened. And so just kind of along those lines, these different phases, like I'm going to walk you through, like you move from this one to this one to this one to this one, but it's not always that linear. You can be in shock and then you can be in the second phase, like all at the same time. They can definitely overlap, and you can also have pieces of some kind of overlapping the others. And so if that's you, and if this gets confusing, you're like, well, I thought I was in 3, but I'm actually still in 2. You can definitely have feet in different phases, and that's okay. You can be transitioning through, you can have little pieces from one that come over. And so just to kind of validate if I'm talking about this and that resonates, that's normal. And we can kind of talk about that. But shock can last a really long time. It's not just the initial, oh my gosh, I had no idea this was happening, okay? But typically it's going to begin with the discovery or the disclosure or the combination, whatever happened in your specific situation. And so some feelings that you might recognize from this phase are feelings of overwhelm, right? Like there's just this flood of information and this wave of I had no idea what was happening and what is my reality, right? Fight or flight. Now, this is something that I will talk about in more detail in future videos, because understanding your nervous system is I think, very, very helpful through the recovery process. But fight or flight is that part of your nervous system that you're going to feel anxious. You're going to feel your heart rate increase. It's called fight or flight because basically your nervous system is like, I need to find safety, and I'm either going to fight for my safety or I'm going to flee from the thing that is dangerous, right? And so when you're in shock, there's a lot of fight or flight. I remember sitting on my bed, hearing information as I was asking incredibly painful questions, and parts of my body would just start shaking while we were having these conversations. And that is a lot of that fight or flight. It's a lot of that shock and that overwhelm sort of all mixed together while your body is processing what's happening and it's trying to figure out what's going on. Obviously, questioning your reality, right? What is true? What can I trust? Who can I trust? What do I believe? What parts of my marriage or relationship before this moment were true? What parts of it were actually real, if any? That's another thing I'm happy to talk about more. I get a lot of questions about, wearing rings or celebrating anniversaries or, pictures and previous relationship versus current relationship. And I'm happy to share all of that. I talk a lot about that on the podcast as well, Recover You podcast. So questioning reality is a big part of phase number 1. Anxiety is a big part of phase number 1. It's this hypervigilance. It's this part of scanning your environment for danger. And the reality is that you now view your spouse as somebody that's dangerous. That's what your brain is doing. That has been labeled. He's dangerous. Danger can come from him. Lack of safety. He is danger. Okay. And so you have to think about that when you're going through the first several months, maybe even the first year of recovery, because one of the things we want to do, I talk about this a lot, and you'll hear me say this a lot in all the videos, is establish safety, establish safety, establish safety, establish safety. This is for your brain. This is for your nervous system to begin to be able to get into recovery. And so when your brain is viewing your partner as dangerous, that's an important thing to be aware of, because where are you sleeping? Are you comfortable being in close physical proximity? Are you comfortable sleeping in the same room? Are you comfortable having sex? Are you not comfortable sleeping in the same room? Are you not comfortable having him see you undress? All these different things, right? There's a lot of boundaries that can come in to provide safety, and all of that's normal. And obviously, I mean, this is so obvious, I feel like I don't even have to say it, but lack of trust, right? Like these are all the feelings that you're going to have in this first phase. You're not going to trust anything. And what I hear from a lot of women is that they don't even trust themselves anymore. And so one of the things I always encourage you to do is think through, before discovery, were there any what you might have considered red flags that you didn't know at the time were red flags, or you did sort of just override that for whatever reason? A lot of times we look back and we have the information we have now, and so we look at the past with that information, but we have to remember the level of information we had in that moment and give ourselves grace, right? So for example, yes, when I looked back, there were a couple red flags this sort of like clicked in my brain just a little bit, but I did not have any information at that time that would have made sense for me to come to the conclusion that my husband is cheating on me. Like, not even an ounce of information that would have led me down that path. And so that didn't make sense until much later. And so if that's you, I just want to sort of validate that. But the reason I bring that up is because a lot of times I hear women say, I can't trust myself, or I want to learn how to trust my gut, or I want to learn how to trust my intuition. And I feel like it's betrayed me too, right? Like how I should have known. Often redeveloping that is reminding yourself that your intuition was working for your benefit in the past. And now we just need to learn how to pick up on the cues and learn how to listen to it and learn how to respond to it so that you don't feel in any sort of conflict within yourself. I hope that what I'm saying makes sense. But what I'm trying to communicate is your intuition always works on your behalf. It can only make decisions based on the information it has, right? So I know there's a lot of guilt sometimes for not seeing it coming. You are not alone in that. This is very, 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 very hard to see for most people. So the lack of trust within yourself is something that, can begin to rebuild when we sort of recognize that that's your intuition does exist. And now that you have information, it can actually be stronger and more impactful. Okay, so what do we do when we're in this first phase? So I mentioned it just a moment ago, but the primary thing that we want to do right away is get to safety. Like, that is what your brain and your nervous system are screaming at you, is get to safety, get to safety, get to safety, get to safety. Okay, that is the primary goal for your brain, for your nervous system, to establish, to feel, to have some sort of safety. So some actions that you're going to take in this phase are going to look like creating basic safety boundaries so that you have some semblance of that in your environment and in your relationship. So again, thinking through, literally making a list, like, what do I need in this phase, like where I'm at right now, to feel safe in my home, to feel safe in my relationship, to feel safe in my bedroom, to feel safe in my body. So some of these are things that maybe you're going to do to support your own body and your own health. And some of these things are things that your husband is going to need to do to provide that space for you, right? And so kind of figuring that out. But that's going to be a big priority in this phase. And gathering information is also going to be a part of that, but you'll see that a little bit more in the next phase. So another thing that's going to be really important through this is setting boundaries and beginning to support basic things like sleep and your nervous system as much as you can. I know sometimes when we're in the deepest part of shock, we actually feel like we're handling things really, really well. That's because when you're in fight or flight, your body is pumping out a lot of adrenaline and a lot of cortisol. And so you're actually like really awake and like really like, oh, I actually feel like my body and my brain is working really well right now. The negative effects of that come later. They come when we stay in this hypervigilant shock, fight or flight for months at a time, right? And then we start to feel the downside and the crash and the burn that had on our body. So as much as we can, as quickly as we can, and sometimes our partner is involved in this, creating safety, getting sleep, nourishing our bodies, bringing extra nourishment in, giving yourself extra grace, extra time, extra space, as much as is possible during this phase can be really helpful, because we want to mitigate the long-term effects of this massive stress as much as we can. And so when we have that information up front, we might feel okay in the moment, but as much as we can support ourselves in this phase, it's going to help us the further we go. I hope that makes sense. And I do have my phone next to me too. So if you guys are watching live or watching on the replay and you have questions, just drop them in the comments. I have this here so that I can hopefully see them as they come up. So the question to ask at the end of this phase is, what support do I need to face the truth as I move forward? That is a hard question. So you just got a lot of information. You had discovery that your life is not what you think it is. And in order to continue to move through this process, you're going to need support. So what does that look like? Who can you talk to? Who can you reach out to? What system can you create? I'm going to talk about that a little bit later too, because I'll get more specific in another phase. But the earlier you can bring that in, the better. And again, I coach women one-on-one. There's CSAT therapists, there's betrayal trauma coaches, there's betrayal trauma therapists. There's lots of people that do this work, but it's important to create a team, because again, in that shock phase, you might feel okay, but eventually it's going to wear on your brain and your body and your nervous system. And this question, what do I need to face the truth as I move forward? I think this is a really good question to really sit with yourself, and give yourself permission to go to the depths of it, because what you're about to go through is really scary. It's really hard. You're going to find out things you never wanted to find. My brain, the way it works, I see a lot in pictures, and that's very, very, very hard for me, because when I learn things that are scary or inappropriate or hurtful, I will often have an image associated with that. And it just is like, it's like a hot iron just like sears my brain with painful stuff. And so that is incredibly difficult to move through if you're not having ways to manage that, if you don't have an outlet, if you don't have support, if you don't have if you're not learning some new coping mechanisms, that sort of thing. And so it will be hard. And I would say if you moving through recovery is always in the end beneficial, but it is difficult, and I can't sugarcoat that. Okay, the second phase you're going to move into is called assessment, or I would even say stability, or establishing stabilization in your environment and in your relationship. So there's a lot of gathering information and asking questions in this phase. This is where you're sort of figuring out what is going to happen now. So you just had the shock of realizing that, okay, maybe he's an addict, or he's been unfaithful, or whatever you found out. Now you're going to sort of learn, how serious is he in getting into recovery or not, right? You're going to find that information out very quickly. And I always say, I mentioned boundaries as an action item in the first phase. Boundaries are so helpful to get this information very quickly. How they respond to boundaries after you find out this information gives you so much information as to how, are they going to take it really seriously? Are they going to respect you? Are they going to be empathetic? Or are they going to gaslight you? Are they going to blame you? Or are they going to justify their behavior? And that is information for what path you want to take in life. So during this assessment and stabilization phase, you're going to be noticing, like, okay, is he getting into recovery? Is he being proactive about it himself? Is this something that he wants more than anything? Like, you're going to get a good sense of where he's at. You're also, like I just mentioned, going to get a good sense of how he's going to treat you through this process. Now, a small caveat there that I often, women will have questions about too, is like how the addict brain works, right? And so it's a little caveat there, is that when they are still an active addict brain, so like the first 90 days, like before they've had 90 days of complete sobriety and celibacy and all of this, that period is really important because it calms the brain chemicals down. When they've been active in addiction patterns for so long, they can simultaneously be the nicest person and be like a really good person and be an incredibly effective manipulative liar, because that's the addict part in them. That's what has been created to keep the addiction alive. And so when in those first couple weeks and maybe even a couple months while they're getting into sobriety, and long before recovery, but as they're getting into sobriety, the way that they respond may be a little more inconsistent than you'd like it to. And so that's where this phase of kind of seeing takes a little bit of time, because what you're looking for is, as they get into sobriety, are they becoming more honest and more open, and are they doing the work, and is there a progression there? There comes a certain point where that, I don't know how I want to say, it's like the valve needs to be closed or whatever, and then it's just, okay, this is total honesty, they're open, their brain chemicals have calmed down, and like now this is like reality, right? But there is a phase in between where they are shifting from being completely active in addiction to getting into sobriety, and I guess you could call it their withdrawal phase, where it's like their brain's going to have some blips, they're not going to remember everything, they might get a little agitated, they might get irritated, that sort of thing. So this is a phase that's going to be a little bit different for everybody, but those are some of the things that you can kind of look out for. This is also the phase where you're going to begin to learn the extent of the behavior and the addiction. You're going to learn, like, how long did this go on? Like, when did this start? What was the extent of the behavior? How far did it go, right? And you're going to begin creating your support team. So I mentioned that in the first one. The sooner you can get this done, the better. But you're going to begin creating the support team. Again, this is really important for the establishing, like, the stability portion of it, and creating that safety. So let's talk about what that support team looks like. And I'm going to give you just sort of like the gold standard, sort of optimized version of that. And then, everybody can kind of personalize a little bit here and there, and do things based on, what's available in your area and what you have available to do and that sort of thing. But this is like gold standard, like what I recommend for all Betrayed partners, to get the most support. The first is that one-on-one trauma practitioner. So you have CSATs, you have trauma therapists, you have betrayal trauma coaches like myself, anyone that you trust. Here's what I typically look for. Somebody that understands the addiction side, the sex addiction side, somebody that understands the betrayal side and looks at it as a trauma. And this is something that not everyone looks for, but I find very important. Someone that has an additional modality outside of talking, so outside of just communicating and cognitive therapy, to actually help your subconscious deal with trauma, deal with the triggers, deal with the emotions, because your trauma and your memories and your emotions are all stored on the subconscious level. And if we could think our way out of some of the pain, we would have done that already. If we could talk our way out of it, we would have done it already. And often rehashing and talking our trauma out over and over and over just ingrains that pain pathway. Whereas if we have effective subconscious modalities and we actually process it, it can actually rewire and begin to heal that part. And so that's why I find that to be very, very important. So in the more conventional therapeutic world, you're going to see things like EMDR or brain spotting. I do things called subconscious reprogramming, quantum time technique, or timeline therapy, however you want to word that. But they all essentially work on the same type of thing, which is in the subconscious, on your emotions, memories, that sort of thing. So creating your team, you're going to have that trauma practitioner. That's what I look for. You're also going to want to look for a support group or community. Now, I'm hoping that Recover You begins to flourish into this support community for you. But right now it's its infancy stage, and so there's a lot of support groups out there. There's a lot of local groups. There's groups at churches. There's groups outside of churches. There's groups online. There's a lot of different programs too. So depending on what you would find most helpful. So truly, and this goes for the groups for the men as well, I have my opinions on what the best groups are, right? I absolutely have, and we talk about it a lot in the podcast, what we promote, what we believe. But there are other people that go to a different type of group and absolutely love it. Okay. So it's finding what works for you and what's local. And also within that, finding a group that you mesh with, right? I've been a part of various different support groups online and in person and through therapists and like all these different things, right? Some of them I clicked with very well, and some of them I never really clicked with, right? And so sometimes it's even just the people. It may not even be the program, it's the people, right? And you want to find a community that you feel safe in, that you feel seen, that you don't feel. And I would say too, like an example of that is like if you have somebody in the group that's moving towards divorce and you have somebody in the group that's moving towards reconciliation, both feel equally supported in their journey, as opposed to the people that are moving through the divorce judging this person or this person, right? And so a safe community is one where you're going to feel safe to make the decisions that are right for you. Creating your team, number one, trauma practitioner, number two, support community. The third one is going to be finding those safe people that are friends or family that you can tell. Now, there's a lot of opinions around telling people when you found out that your husband has cheated on you. And I think we're going to make a whole podcast episode about this because I think it's, especially in the religious community, it's fairly problematic how many women are told like never to tell anyone that this has happened in their life. And it causes a lot of problems. I think sometimes what they're trying to avoid there is like, because I've seen this happen too, is where the opposite happens and you just go and like vent to everybody with almost like the intention to like destroy or like shame your spouse, right? And so I think there is a time and a place. I think there is a beneficial way to do it. But the reality is that this is your story too, and you do need supportive people on your team. So whether that is a best friend that you know is team you, whether that is a family member that is not the town gossip or the family gossip, right? While you're processing this, while you are in the midst of pain, it can be incredibly beneficial to find who those safe people are. And again, I can make a deeper video maybe on finding safe people and what that looks like, but that's going to be important. So again, drop a question or a comment below. Yes, I'd like to see that video, or can you talk more about this? I'm happy to do it. Okay, so through this stabilization phase, one of the things you're going to do when you get these practitioners and when you kind of create your group, one thing that I recommend, if there is a chance of reconciliation, like if there's any chance, if you are keeping that door open, then one of the things you're going to want to pursue in this phase is called a full therapeutic disclosure and a polygraph. And in order to do that, your husband is going to go work with the CSAT and get all of that established. And so part of that is for his own personal growth, to get out of denial and to get into taking personal responsibility for his behavior. And the other part of it is for you. So if you're keeping that door of reconciliation open, then in order to move forward, you have to have a foundation of trust. And just from my personal experience and from coaching so many women at this point, through this, and meeting so many of you that have actually gone through years, if not sometimes decades, of general counseling or marriage counseling, and it's never been addressed as a sex addiction, or it's never been addressed as a trauma for you and that sort of thing. I see how beneficial, and this is why it's created this way, I see how beneficial the full therapeutic disclosure and the polygraph is. Because that trust, when it's not handled appropriately after infidelity, when that's not stair-stepped up and you know, he hasn't had the opportunity to fully disclose, or has refused to fully disclose, or, you know, whatever, or the practitioners have said, oh, that's not necessary information. What I see is that years or decades later, the spouse is still struggling. And so there's a reason that after infidelity, after sex addiction, the full therapeutic disclosure is incredibly helpful. It's incredibly important for both parties. So if that door is open, that's something that's going to happen during this phase 2, or at least begin during phase 2. So here are some things to think about, some action items to think about if you're finding yourself in this second phase. We're sort of trying to see, like, where is this going to go? And I really am trying to establish some sort of like stability here. Question to ask yourself is, what do you expect in a healthy marriage? I want you to get really, really clear on that. I want you to journal it out like you're 15 years old and like dreaming about the perfect marriage. I want you to think about the details. How do you guys communicate to each other? How do you view each other? How do you interact? How do you communicate? How do you connect? What does your sex life look like? You know, what does it feel like? What are the emotions that are present? How do you feel about each other? Those sorts of things. Because that is the standard that you need to hold through recovery. If you don't know what you're working for, if you and your spouse don't know what you're working for, this is an incredibly painful process. And I don't want you to get stunted somewhere in the middle where you're just surviving with each other. You're just living in the same house. I want you to reach that point of like, we have done the work. We really love each other. We are two totally different people living in actual recovery. And so in order to do that, you've got to get really clear on what does that look like? Because when we have the vision, we can start to see the barriers that are in front of it. And great, then we can start to work on those. If those are beliefs, if those are triggers, if those are fears, if those are boundaries that need to be set, perfect. But if we don't know where we're going, we can't see how to get there. Another question to ask yourself, kind of along those lines, are what boundaries do you place around, what do you need to place for stability around your relationship, around his recovery, around your recovery, around your communication together, around sex, around intimacy, around money? What are the boundaries that need to be set for your safety and for your continued growth? And the question to ask at the end of this phase is, before you move on to the next one, or if you're trying to assess which phase you're in, is, do I feel safe and do I have a good idea of my long-term goals? So like at the end of this phase, you're like, I feel safe. I feel like he's getting into recovery, and I have a pretty clear idea of where I'm headed. Then you're probably moving into the next phase. Or I feel totally safe? He's demonstrated, I've gotten all the information. He's demonstrated he's not willing to recover. Maybe we're moving our own ways, or we're doing an in-house separation, or, whatever that decision may be for you. It's different for everybody, but you're going to have a clear idea of like what's coming down the road. So then you get into phase 3, and this is where a lot of what people would call the work, or the inner work, or the trauma work, however you want to word that, is going to happen for the betrayed partner. So up until this point, so I coach women through like all of the phases. And in the first couple, it is a lot of verbal coaching. It's a lot of communication. It's a lot of setting boundaries, prepping for disclosure, that sort of thing. Once disclosure and the polygraph has happened, or let's say you're separating and you're moving towards divorce, right? Once that decision basically has been made, like we're moving forward or we're not, or I've gotten the information, whatever it is. Once you get into this third phase, this is what I call active healing, because this is when you feel safe, this is when your emotions are going to start coming up. This is where the long-term impact of that stress is going to come up, because now you're no longer fighting for survival, and your body has the ability to actually say, hey, this really bothers me, or this is a long-term fear that I have, or this is an insecurity that was highlighted by the betrayal. And so that's when this is all going to come up. And I see that happen a lot, is like, hey, actually, like in survival and stabilization, you might feel like you have some control and you're doing pretty well. And then when you actually start to feel safe and grounded again, a lot of fear comes up. Okay. So that's where this inner work and this trauma healing and this processing comes in. So this is when your body and mind are a little more calm. This is when your boundaries are respected. Communication is open. You've got, again, if you're moving towards reconciliation, you've already gotten the information, you've gotten the polygraph, you've got the foundation. Trust has the potential to begin being rebuilt at this point. And again, this is where you're going to start processing those deeper emotions of anger, sadness, grief. I work with a lot of women that need assistance in processing emotions towards the affair partner, right? Or emotions towards their husband, or self-confidence issues around their body, or all sorts of different things like that. You may experience more fatigue in this phase, believe it or not, because again, going back to kind of what I was talking about in the first phase, as you come out of fight or flight, that's actually when you're going to feel more of the outcome of being in it. So being in it, you can actually feel kind of good, but coming out of it, your body's going to be depleted, because that state gobbles up your energy, it gobbles up your nutrients, and it just sort of leaves you depleted. So a lot of times, and this really is true for any type of recovery, so physical recovery, like you think about when you get sick and you need a lot of extra sleep, it's the same for mental, emotional as well. So again, giving yourself as much grace as you can. If you need to take naps, if you have that ability, if you need to go to bed a little bit earlier, if you need to sleep in a little bit longer, like if you have the flexibility to do that in your life, giving yourself the space and the grace to do that, because this period of recovery, your body and your mind are going to need more nourishment. It's going to be like, okay, I finally feel like the world isn't completely collapsing around me. I need to recover from surviving that. Okay. And so giving yourself as much grace as you can there, nourishing your body, your mind, it's going to be really important. And this is, again, mental, emotional, and physical. Okay. So individually in this phase, what you're going to be doing is doing the trauma work, like I mentioned. So he's going to be doing it if you're moving towards reconciliation, you're doing it separately, but at the same time. So trauma work and emotional processing, both of you are going to be addressing fears, insecurities, negative beliefs, trauma. For him, what contributed to the behaviors. For you, what has come out of the betrayal that has been really hurtful. As a couple, you're going to begin having deeper conversations, understanding each other's emotional wounding. Like as you start going to this, there's probably going to be some really great conversations that come from your individual work. You're going to learn how to see each other a little bit differently. You're going to begin growing into different people, and you're also going to be working towards that mutual goal. So again, having that really clear vision is going to be really important. A question to sort of ask at the end of this phase, as you move into the next one, is, am I able to identify my emotions, my limiting beliefs, And do I have the tools to effectively process them and to identify them and to effectively process them? So that's a lot of the work that you're going to do with your coach, counselor, therapist, whoever you're working with. And that's why I really encourage you to have somebody that is subconscious mind and trauma focused, because that's a lot of the work that I end up doing in this phase. And it's some of the most rewarding work. It's some of the most rewarding that I've done in my recovery journey. And then working with my clients, it is just absolutely transformational to be able to identify and pull the specific beliefs we have that are negative. Like, I am unlovable because of XYZ, or one that will come up maybe fairly often is something around the lines of, well, I am not, I will never be beautiful enough or thin enough to be loved ever again. Right. And so that's a big fear. Now, consciously, we might not believe that, but subconsciously, because of the experiences we've had in our life, that's a huge limiting belief that can come up. And maybe we started to believe it in third grade when somebody made fun of our outfit, but then betrayal proved it real hard, right, in our adulthood. And so that may be coming up. And so then what I do with these clients is we figure out exactly what the wording is, exactly the belief that you have that hurts, that is hindering your growth, that is keeping you stuck, that is, that you are afraid of, or that is painful. And then we create a new belief, a new identity, a replacement belief for that the identity that you want to step into. And then we do some exercises on a subconscious level to release the old and accept the new. And that's pretty cool. So that's a lot of the work that you're going to be doing in that third stage, that active healing. I'm now addressing the wounds. I actually had a client that she's just been absolutely amazing to work with. And she and her husband have done such beautiful work. And I said to her yesterday on our call, I said, do you remember like when we started working together and she had made this comment that was basically like, oh my gosh, like it feels like I'm reopening a wound that we already sort of dealt with. And I used the analogy with her at the time that I was like, yes, because what essentially happened was a Band-Aid was placed over it. And now we have to take the Band-Aid off and go in and clean the wound and suture it and put the right salve on it and cup, we have to actually heal the wound. And she was so brave and her husband was so brave and they were so willing to do the work. And so they ripped that Band-Aid off and they cleaned that wound and they did the work. And it's so cool to see their recovery journey being willing to do that. It's just been a really beautiful story. And the outcome of that has just been so encouraging. And so that's a lot of the work. And again, I'm giving that as an example as a couple doing it. If you're separated at this point or you've decided to separate, a lot of this individual work can be done too. But the idea is that in this phase, it is the addressing of the wounds that came out from this experience. Okay, so then you're going to move into the fourth phase, which is creation. And this is a little bit more exciting. This is a little more relaxing. This is a little more fun. This is when you're beginning to move past the grief. This is when your triggers are fewer and further apart. So a lot of times I'll mention to women, as you begin to heal, what it ends up feeling like is instead of a full body or a nervous system reaction or a visceral reaction, your triggers are more of a thought like, oh, I wonder, blah, blah, blah. And then you're able to kind of let it go, as opposed to, oh, I wonder, or you have an image or you have a thought, and then all of a sudden you're in fight or flight and you feel afraid or you feel like you're in danger, and that's how your body is responding. So as you move through these phases, that becomes less and less and less and less as the wound is healed. So they become fewer, lighter, further apart. Your nervous system begins to actually feel safe, to feel more grounded. You really know where you are and where you're headed. So are you guys moving into building something new? Are you separating? You're very, very clear on that at this point. If you're moving towards reconciliation, you are really rebuilding trust. You're feeling pretty good. Like maybe there's some triggers that still come up, but you really are able to believe what your spouse says, where he is, what he's doing, that his heart is in the right place, that sort of thing. You're beginning to find purpose in the pain. So you're beginning to make sense out of what has happened, and you're able to look back and go, okay, I've learned some different things about myself, and maybe there's some positive things that have come out of this. And you're able to make sense of the thing that a few months ago, maybe you were just surviving. You begin to engage in the world again, engage in your friendships, connect with people more, do things that you enjoy more, kind of being yourself again. At the same time that you are more yourself, I would say that this phase is also kind of discovering the new version of yourself. For me, I feel like every trauma iteration in my life has shifted me into a different person. And it has just changed how I see the world, changed how I interact with people. And so I think as you go through this process, you're going to be discovering like who this new version of yourself, who this new version of you is, and creating that intentionally. So again, going back to the last phase, you are identifying the parts of yourself that are keeping you from true health, right? And you're choosing the identity that you want to step into as you continue to recover. And so when you get into this phase of creation, you're really kind of learning how to be that person and choose that identity and that sort of thing. And so then you're feeling happier, more positive emotions again. You're viewing betrayal as a chapter in your life. It is not your identity and it's not your permanent state. So that's a really beautiful thing as you continue to move through recovery. So action items in this phase are going to be more about finding joy, getting into that creative state, right? So engaging in activities that bring connection and joy. So much of recovery is just all consuming. I mean, my husband and I talk about it on the podcast as like you view it as cancer. And so like everything in your life stops because this is like the number one thing that you have to prioritize. And that's how serious it is. And so when you get to a place where you're stable, you've processed some of the woundings, you're building trust, all these types of things, you're healing yourself, then it becomes important to begin separating from that identity and moving into connection and creation and joy and happiness again. And so finding those activities, engaging in those relationships, that sort of thing. New habits, you're going to develop new habits as you become more secure in your relationship, or if you're moving away from it, secure without your relationship. And I would even say both would coexist with reconciliation, because the healthiest version of a reconciled relationship is when both of you know that you would be fine without the other person, but you are healthy and choosing to be in the relationship anyway. So there's a level there of healing. And then in this relationship, even though you're feeling happier, you're feeling lighter, you're connecting, you're engaging in things that you like again, you like life a little bit more, you're going to continue the support and the behaviors that have gotten you to this place. One of the biggest things on the addiction side that we see is just like I don't know the word I'm looking for is what is it? The hole that people will fall into, they'll trip over. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but the analogy, but you'll understand what I'm saying. One of the things that happens frequently that is not good, I'll say it that way, on the addiction side is they feel so confident in their recovery that 6 months in, they'll stop doing the things that got them into recovery, right? I don't need therapy anymore. I don't need to go to my group anymore. I don't need to do my journaling anymore. All these positive habits that actually got them to the place that's feeling so good. And then they stop doing those things because they feel so good. And then a month later, they relapse, right? And so I think it's very important on both sides that there will always be some type of proactive recovery thing going on. Now you might say, oh, but I'm not an addict, right? I'm a betrayed spouse. And it shifts, it dramatically shifts from phase to phase, what type of work you're doing. So the biggest bulk, the hardest part is in that phase of active healing, where you're actively identifying the woundings and the beliefs and you're processing them and you're choosing right. That is the hardest part in terms of that type of work. But then, you don't want to stay stagnant in life. Neither one of you, right? You want to continue growing. You want to continue improving. You want to continue. And so whether you're separated or apart, you want to grow in your life. And so that type of work shifts a little bit as you continue through these phases, more into just personal growth stuff. But, we all need coaches. We all need therapists. We all need these people that kind of help us. So engaging in something always to continue that forward movement. So question here in this fourth phase is going to be, do I feel like I can relax? Am I beginning to enjoy life again? Have I found purpose in this process? Do I have hope for the future? And do I know that I will be okay no matter what happens? Those are the questions that if you can say, yes, I know I feel hopeful. I know that I will be okay. I'm finding more joy. Then you might be shifting into this phase, or you might be kind of even moving out of this phase. Okay. The last phase that you're going to kind of rest in and live in and personal growth in for the rest of your life is U 2.0. Maybe at some point there'll be a U 3.0. I don't know. But in terms of betrayal recovery, this is sort of the last frontier, the last phase. And this is U 2.0. This is your new life, the new you. This is, you feel normal, but in a new way. This is your new normal, right? Like before, I wouldn't have said some of the things that are totally normal in Patrick and my life were normal like 10 years ago. Like that wasn't normal, right? But now they are. And it's a safe thing. It's a happy thing. It's a comfortable thing. There's still some boundaries in place. There's still some accountability. You know, he still goes to his groups so many times a week, right? Like there are things that are our new normal that are very safe, that are very comfortable. You have the tools and resources to address whatever comes up in the future. So this is kind of what I was saying. Like now, you know, you've been through all those phases. You kind of know like, okay, if this comes up, I know who to reach out to. If this comes up, I have a tool to process it. I know if I have, because limiting beliefs and fears and stuff, those are things that we deal with our whole life, right? And while this might have been the biggest, most horrible thing that will ever happen, other things that are stressful can happen in the future, right? And so when these things come up and when we have other thoughts come up or fears or insecurities, now we have the tools, right? We know who to reach out to. We know what the processes are. We've already done the work, and we just keep building on that. And you're able to find joy and purpose in life again. And so really in this phase 2.0, this is really, you create the life you want, you live the life you want, and you enjoy the life you want. And so that's kind of the final phase there. A lot of people will ask, well, how long does this take? How do I get to phase 5, right? Like, and how long does it take? So I'll just give you the general. Again, everybody's a little bit different. Everybody's a little bit unique. Everybody's journey is going to be a little bit different. For men to get into full recovery, it's typically 2 to 5 years. And that does not mean that they are going to be relapsing or that they have to be relapsing up to the 2 years. It just means that there's a lot of work that goes into actually getting into true recovery where they are totally free and they feel like another person and they feel secure and like they don't even want to go back there, and new habits and brain rewiring and all that kind of stuff. And that just takes a long time. They could be sober the entire 2 years, but real recovery, deep recovery is 2 to 5 years. And for the betrayed spouse, it's 1 to 3. And so much of that depends on that first couple phases. How quickly can you get into stability and safety, and how much support do you have through that process? Again, I have worked with so many women who they've tried to address these problems in their relationship. They've gone to marriage counseling. They've gone to their pastor. They've gone to a general therapist, all these kinds of things. And then years down the road, they're still struggling because nobody has addressed it as a sex addiction and as betrayal trauma. Once these tools are in place and you work with the right practitioners and you have those tools and those resources, that's when healing really starts. And so that 1 to 3 years for a betrayed partner really depends a lot on how quickly you can get into safety and stability. And your partner plays a role in that, right? Like if that first year he keeps relapsing that whole year, I don't believe if you work towards reconciliation, it's my personal belief that deep healing does not begin for the betrayed spouse until the addicted spouse is actually sober and is no longer relapsing, because that process of them getting there is traumatizing, and so that keeps hindering your own healing. So once you have that stability and that safety, that consistency, is about 1 to 3 years. So where are you? If you feel brave to drop in the comments, are you in shock, assessment, active healing, creation, or U 2.0? Which phase resonated most with you? And here are just a couple questions that I think, depending on what phase you identified, can be helpful to continue to move you through. So if you are in the shock phase and you notice that you really resonated with that, I would ask or maybe journal through, this would be a great prompt for you. What actions can I take to begin establishing safety today? What does my body need to feel safe? What conversations do I need to have? What boundaries do I need to set? Do I need to create a safer space for my sleeping environment? Just make a list. Like, what do you think that it would take for you to begin feeling safe? If you are in the phase number 2, the assessment and stability phase, what information do I need What support tools and resources do I need? Do I have at least one non-professional support person or friend that I can talk to? I also encourage the professionals as well, but do you have at least one non-professional family friend that is a safe person for you? So that's something that if the answer is no, maybe you can take action on that and think through. If you're in the active healing phase, what fears, insecurities, triggers, or beliefs are keeping me stuck? What resources do I have, or maybe what resources do I need to support me? If you're in the creation phase, what activities light me up? And this is a fun one. What is my vision for future me? I have a really cool future you meditation on the podcast. If you scroll through the podcast, you'll see, I think it's like higher self meditation or future you or something like that, but you'll see it's a meditation. That would be a great exercise to go through to visualize that highest version of yourself and like what does that look like and what comes up from your subconscious. And that's free. It's on the podcast. It's Recover You, spelled the same as this group. Recover You podcast. And the last one is if you feel like you are in you 2.0, what area of my life needs the most attention for this next phase of growth? And what helpful tools need to be part of my long-term support? So again, just that ongoing like personal growth. Like, do I need to check in with a coach or a therapist like maybe once a month, maybe like every quarter, just for some maintenance? If you do subconscious work and you're working with a coach doing that type of work, do I need to book sessions again, like once a month or once a quarter, just to kind of, as different things come up in my life, to make sure that I'm still feeling supported there. All right, everyone, this was a long one. I actually intended this video to be about 30 minutes and it was almost an hour. So if you are watching live or watching the replay and you made it this far, thank you. Congratulations. I appreciate your time and being here. And again, what resonated with you in this video? What phase are you in? What support do you need? Was there something that I commented on throughout the phases that you want more information on or that applies to your life? Drop it in the comments below. Remember, this is a private community. Only the people inside can see your comments. So it's totally safe to comment. If you still don't want to be seen, post anonymously, but drop the comments below and just let me know what resonated with you, what questions you have, what topics you would like me to talk about in the future. And I will definitely make sure to answer those and to do future videos on those topics. So thanks so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.